Lately in my videos, we've been talking about how the Gospels are backed up by secular history through little obscure facts and small details. These details show that the authors were knowledgeable, truthful, and close to the facts. This means that what they wrote down probably goes back to what the original eyewitnesses claimed. In today's video, we'll dive into 3 facts about money and how the Gospels line up with what we know from secular history. These insights come from Lydia McGrew's excellent book, Testimonies to the Truth, which I'll link in the description so you can get a copy. Let's get into it. In Matthew 17:24-27, there's this strange story about the temple tax and the coin in the fish's mouth. So the collectors for the 2 drachmae temple tax approach Peter and ask if his teacher Jesus pays the tax. Peter tells them, yeah, Jesus does. But when Peter goes into the house in Capernaum where Jesus is hanging out, Jesus kind of hints that they shouldn't have to pay the tax. But then he tells Peter to cast a hook into the sea. Jesus predicts that Peter will find a coin in the fish's mouth and tells him to use that coin to pay the tax for both of them. Neat story and all, but there's actually some external evidence that backs up one part of the story. The specific coin that Jesus told Peter he would find in the fish's mouth. As mentioned earlier, the temple tax was 2 drachmas per person and is literally referred to as the 2 drachmae tax in the Greek text. But when Jesus talks about the coin Peter will find in the fish's mouth, he uses the word stater. As it turns out, a stater was indeed the term used for a coin worth 4 drachmae. So Jesus didn't just say that Peter would find any coin. He predicted that Peter would find the exact amount needed to pay the tax for both of them, which would be 4 drachmae total. This highlights how well the author knew the customs of the time, including the specifics about the temple tax and the exact coin needed to pay for 2 people, namely Jesus and Peter. But Matthew has even more coin sense in his gospel. In Matthew 20, 1-16, Jesus shares a parable about workers in a vineyard. The landowner agrees with the laborers on a day's wage, but the story highlights how the workers got jealous when those who were hired much later in the day end up getting the exact same pay. These latecomers didn't work through the heat of the day, so the early workers felt that it wasn't fair. Some translations of the story say that the workers were paid a penny, which can be confusing for today's readers. The actual word in the text is denarius, showing how accurately Matthew recorded Jesus' words. The Roman historian Tacitus tells us that around AD 14, regular Roman soldiers were paid 10/16 of a Roman denarius per day. Soldiers who negotiated their pay before enlisting got a full denarius a day, while Praetorian guards made even more at 2 denarii per day. Tacitus mentions that there was an agitator telling the soldiers that they're being treated unfairly, not only because they're not getting a denarius a day, but also because of harsh working conditions. The value of a denarius stayed pretty consistent up until Nero's time, which gives us good sense of the buying power these workers had with their wages. The landowner's offer of 1 denarius per day to the workers in the story was a decent deal. Not too over the top, but about what a Roman soldier would get if they had negotiated a slightly better contract than the base pay of the lowest ranked recruits. But just imagine how difficult it would be to guess this fact without Googling it about what a typical and fair wage was for certain jobs, say in the 1990s. How much more so for people in Matthew's time. But there's actually more money matters here in Matthew's gospel. In Matthew 23:23, there's a section often called the Woes to the Pharisees, where Jesus takes off the gloves. He doesn't hold back. He goes off on the Pharisees, calling them blind guides and really letting them have it. He says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you tithe mint and dill and cumin and have neglected the weightier provisions of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These are the things you should have done without neglecting the others. You blind guides! You strain out a gnat and swallow a camel." But were the Pharisees and scribes really this nitpicky, or are the Gospels just exaggerating here? Jesus paints a picture of the religious leaders as trying to tithe right down to the herbs. But how would you even go about doing that? Just imagine the little jars of fennel seeds, dill seeds, or oregano leaves that you get from the store with the amounts on them like half an ounce. Can you imagine having to figure out how much herb you had just to give 1/10 to God? It might sound extreme, but as it turns out, people really did go that far. The Talmud contains discussions on which plants, including herbs, needed to be tithed and which parts to tithe, and the circumstances for doing so. So, Jesus' portrayal wasn't just an exaggeration, He was actually calling out real practices that were going on. Check out this quote. Here's what one of the texts says. He who husks barley may husk each grain singly and eat without tithing, but if he husks and put them into his hand, he is liable to tithe. He who rubs parched ears of wheat may blow out the chaff from hand to hand and eat, but if he blows and puts the grain in his lap, he is liable. Or here's another one. If coriander was sown for the sake of the seed, the plant is exempt from tithe. But if sown for the sake of the plant, then both the seed and the plant must be tithe. Rabbi Eleazar said, as for dill, tithe must be given from the seed and the plant and the pods. But the sages, however, say both the seeds and plant are tithed only in the case of pepperwort and aruca. So, wow, very meticulous. It turns out Jesus wasn't exaggerating at all, and neither was Matthew when he reported that Jesus said this. Keep in mind, all these money insights come straight from the Gospel of Matthew, and the first two are completely unique to his Gospel. Skeptics are very quick to question whether Matthew actually wrote his Gospel, even more so than the other Gospels, but as a tax collector, he would naturally be way more interested in money than the other writers. Biblical scholar Werner Marx points out that Matthew mentions money way more than the others. Money is mentioned 31 times in Matthew, where Mark only brings it up 6 times, and Luke mentions it only 14 times. This focus on money fits perfectly with Matthew's background. Anyway, I hope you're learning something from these videos on how secular history backs up the Gospels. Subscribe for more tidbits like these as I continue the series, and be sure to check out the playlist to get up to speed for more details. Thank you so much for watching.